Good morning, everybody. We are learning today Chassidus. We're learning the Maimer, the Bar Mitzvah, channeling the divine. And today we're going to go a little further in the Maimer to be able to understand. Remember, it's a short Maimer, just three paragraphs. And we're going further. We discussed so far that the Jewish people said to God, we'd love to start to study Torah by day and night, but the problem is that we don't have the time. So God says, okay, instead of Torah day and night, what you can do is lay to fill in. We got to understand what this medrash in the oral Torah is talking about. Good morning, Elaine. So we said we need to understand the meaning of Torah. We need to understand the meaning of tefillin. Why would the Jews want to study Torah all day and all night? Why? Do you want to study Torah all day and all night? Dan, you love to study Torah.
Yeah.
Why?
Just to feel like it's the right thing to do. So we're supposed to do.
To me, studying Torah is probably the most meaningful experience I can do in my life, if you think about it. I mean, let me ask you, what is the most meaningful thing that you can do in your life? What is the most meaningful experience that you can do in your whole life? A serious question. If you could pick a day of anything in the whole wide world, what would you do? Help people, like soup kitchen kind of stuff?
Whatever makes sense.
What do you say, Rob?
Most meaningful thing is I would get in a plane with a lot of bombs.
Get in a plane with a lot of bombs, okay?
And bomb that caravan heading towards.
Bomb the caravan.
Yeah.
The lethal.
It's tremendously meaningful to me.
Doesn't it sound like you remember the why don't we bomb the trains to Auschwitz?
Right. Absolutely. Why didn't we?
Right.
We didn't want to upset.
It wasn't we. It wasn't we. Why didn't they? That was the question. Why didn't they? I mean, I don't know where you were, but I wasn't there. We were in Auschwitz.
I wasn't there either. I was in.
Yeah, my family was in Auschwitz.
You're right. That's a better one. Why did anyone, any of the allies, whether
Good morning, Terry. Long time no see. And Garrett and David and Corey.
They didn't want to risk an American plane being shot.
Well, why not a British
didn't like
plane?
the answer.
Why not a?
That's what Hashem
because
wanted.
the French-
What?
Well, the French.
Am I getting what?
You didn't like my answer. Hashem wants us to study.
I didn't say I didn't like your answer.
I'm just curious.
Oh, you mean the answer about Torah?
Yeah.
That's what Hashem wants us to do? Well, Hashem wants us to do a lot of things. Why only Torah? Why don't you? He wants you to pack soup kitchen as well, right? He wants you to, do all sorts of things. Why only Torah? Warren, what's the most meaningful thing you could do? A good night's sleep. So if you think about it, it's a tough question. We have a glass ceiling. There is a glass ceiling. We're limited. Yeah, hurry.
Rabbi answered this in the Torah we saw a week ago.
What's
Some
that?
people were suited to study,
Very
et cetera,
good
et
about
cetera. Other people were suited to be a doctor and care for people. And other people were involved in doing, everyone should be doing mitzvahs, but some people are more involved in charity than others. Everyone has.
So you're saying it's not one size fits all. You can't say that everybody is the same, cut to the same cloth. Everybody's got.
And he said, don't feel guilty if you're following the path that you know Hashem wants you to follow on. If you're a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, and you can't read Torah all day long, you shouldn't feel Jewish guilt.
Right.
That's the path that Hashem puts you on.
Right. So everyone's got their own personal journey. Well, this is where this discourse is going. This discourse is really going to expose to us why it is that I said before that Torah is the most meaningful. Learning Torah is the most meaningful experience that I can do. And we'll learn the same thing about tefillin, right? Because if you think about it, you also you could spend time with your children. That's very meaningful. You could what? Grandchildren. It's a very interesting question to ask yourself. What is my deepest experience? There's love, which is a very deep experience. But at the end of the day, I mean, giving is a very, very nice thing to do. Giving is a very, very nice thing, which is not even human necessarily. Human is more self-centered. Giving is more of a godly thing. But if you want to experience the divine, if you want to channel the divine, that's a very powerful concept. To channel infinity, that's through Torah. That's through Torah. So that's an interesting concept. I mean, you could be helping the poor, and it's very nice, very important. You could be bombing, the Russians, but
The Iranian.
yeah, you could be doing that. But at the end of the day, it's all limited efforts. But if you want to access the infinite, to channel the divine, and that's a very empowering concept, that we can even channel the divine. Because not everybody can. An animal cannot channel the divine. Quite frankly, a Gentile cannot channel the divine. This is uniquely Jewish. It's quite an interesting concept. Only a couple million people on the face of this earth have access to this particular key. It's interesting, right? And the question is if we're squandering it or not. There's a great story.
But Gentiles, God is God of all people.
Right. The question is what kind of access to have. What kind of...
They cannot in any way access.
I wouldn't say in any way.
I mean,
In a different way.
some way.
It's in a different way, yeah. It's a story of a Russian peasant, or maybe it was a Ukrainian peasant,
Better yet.
who was, the peasants would get on the train. This is in the old days, a couple hundred years ago. They would try to get on the train, and they would sneak their way onto the train because they couldn't afford a ticket. So what would happen was that the train would come to the station. They would jump in and they would try to hide under the seats. And hopefully the ticket master wouldn't find them asking for the ticket, and they would be able to reach their destination. So there's this guy, totally naive. He goes to the train station, buys himself a ticket, a first-class ticket. Buys a first-class ticket. And then he goes to the train station. He sees, as everybody gets on the train, they all dive under the seats. He also dives under the seat. But he's a chassid. He doesn't really know how to hide that well. So his talis, his tzitzis is sticking out of the tuchus over there, So when the ticket master comes by, pulls him by the tzitzis, pulls him out. You get out of there, you. And he pulls him out from under the seat and he says, "Ticket, please." He's like, "Oh, sure. You want to take it here?" The guy looks at the ticket. He's like, "You're first class. What are you behaving like a beggar? Get out of here. Go into to get a proper cabin, right?" So it's a metaphor for how we Jews behave. We carry a first class ticket. You're a Jew. You've got a first class ticket. You got access to the VIP lounge. And what are we doing? We're behaving like everybody else. We're hiding under the seats. Guys, pull it together. All right, good. So that's what this mimer is about. It's trying to show us, get out from under your seat. It's going to show us our ticket, right? Okay. So now in order to understand this concept, we need to understand the problem first. First, we need to understand the problem, and then we can understand how we fix it. The problem we're going to explore is that God doesn't really care about this world. God is not engaged and involved in this world because this world is finite and God is infinite. He's got bigger fish to fry. I mean, as if you could say bigger fish to fry about something that's infinite. God is infinite. What do he care? Does he really care? Let's take a look at this concept, okay? But before you get into any heretical views here, God forbid, I just want to say that of course, God cares about this world. He creates it. If he wasn't creating it at every moment, it wouldn't exist. Of course, he cares about it. It's just that his focus is not on it. When we study Torah, we channel the divine into this world. Okay? That's what we do. Let's take a look. So I'm on page 20 if you have the book, Channeling the Divine. The paragraph begins, God's loftiness. This concept can be explained with the verse, "Look down from your holy abode from heaven and bless your people, Israel." This is a verse in the Torah. It's in Deuteronomy. Okay, we're going to talk now about the connection between God and creation and the role that Torah and the souls of the Jewish people play in enhancing this relationship between God and the creation. And this will lead to an understanding of the Torah's greatness and why the Jewish people wanted to labor in the study of Torah day and night. Okay, so what is the meaning of this verse? "Look down from your holy abode from heaven and bless your people, O Israel." Your people, Israel. It is written, God is exalted above all nations. That's in Psalms. Hashem is way, 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 way higher. I.e., he is uplifted, and regarding his essence, the verse declares, "If you have sinned, how have you affected him?" This quote comes from the book of Job. "If you have sinned, how have you affected him? If you are righteous, so what do you give him? And what does he receive from your hand?" In other words, you think you make a difference. All the higher and lower worlds are considered as nothing before him. Don't lose your faith just yet, guys, all right? This concept is alluded to in the verse, for his name is sublime to himself. Only its radiance, which means its radiant reflection, are upon the earth and the heaven. His name is up in the heavens. It's only his reflection that it comes down here. We're getting an idea of the infinity of the greatness of God, right? This also explains the Zohar's expression, when God rose to the heights. This refers to when the godly energy ascended from the level of radiance that shines upon the earth and heaven, level after level, to its source in God's essence. And at that level, at God's essence, the worlds are of no importance. And God's control over the worlds is not manifest. Okay? This state of being, which is the default state of being. Now, bear in mind, in the beginning of creation, God was fully present here. With Adam and Eve, he was fully present. This is really the Rebbe's opening discourse. We've spoken about it a few times. Basi Legani. In the beginning of creation, God was fully present here. He was engaging with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He was all over the details, micromanaging. Then they made the sin. So what happened? God expelled himself.
Expelled them
And himself one level up. Well, that's an important concept because God is your shadow. How you behave is how he reflects, right? If you go 1 mile away from God, you're not 1 mile away from God. You're 2 miles away from God. You go 1 mile, he goes 1 mile.
goes back to measure for measure.
Measure for measure, same concept, right? So then there was another sin. There was 7 sins that led to God evacuating all 7 levels. He was up on top of the mountain, right? Then came the 7 righteous. Avraham brought it from 7 to 6. Yitzchak brought it to 5. Yaakov brought it to 4. Levi, the son of Yaakov, these were the ones that weren't serving idols in Egypt. These were the ones that were studying Torah the whole time. Levi brought it to 3, right? Kahas, Amram, Moshe brought it all the way down. So when Moshe comes, what happens to Moshe? The novelty of Moshe's experience is when it says Vayered Havaya al Har Sinai, and Havaya, infinity comes down to Mount Sinai. This is a process that took 2,448 years from the beginning of creation when it went till it came back down. And life was good now. God is back down on earth. It's amazing. God is fully focused on us. But now, that lasted for 40 days. 40 days later, they do the sin of the golden calf. He's like, I'm done. I'm tired of this. I'm out of here. Moshe negotiates a settlement. Took him 120 days of negotiating. But they figured out a deal. And God says, okay, I have forgiven as per your request. And that is 120 days after Shavuos, when the Torah was given.
Dropped into a hole anyway.
What's 100? What hole?
People who built the golden calf of worship.
Oh, those guys are gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the remnant.
Right.
What's 120 days after the Torah was given? It's the holiday of Yom Kippur, Day of Forgiveness. That's when God said, I've forgiven, right? So now God is back down here. And what happens? He says, I'm back with you guys. Okay, it's been like a yo-yo here, right? A roller coaster. Now he's back with us. And what happens now is that he says, okay, mikdash, and you shall build for me a sanctuary. And I will dwell amongst them. What does that mean? Not only will I dwell in your sanctuary, I will dwell in all of you. Each of you should be a sanctuary to me, right? And that was terrific for 410 years until our first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. We had 7 years of exile. Now, what does it mean, exile? Spiritual exile. Not just that the Jews were in exile, measure for measure. God was also in exile. The destruction of our temple is symbolic of God's pulling back, aloofness, right? Which is why when God pulls back, that's why we were vulnerable. It's a very important concept. When God removes himself from the picture, you're now vulnerable. It's like the shepherd walking away from the sheep. You're now vulnerable to attack, right? That lasted 7 years. They come back with Esther and Achashverosh's son Darius. The second sends them back. They build the second temple. It lasts 420 years. And once again, the temple, God dwells amongst the people. But bear in mind, there was a big difference between the first and the second temple. The second temple was lacking the Ark of the Covenant. It wasn't there. The room was bare, the Holy of Holies. Why? It was hidden away. It was never brought back. So the degree of divinity, of divine presence in the second temple was mitigated. Then when the second temple was destroyed, now we've started the rough ride, the long road to freedom, the long walk to freedom, started when the second temple was destroyed by Titus, the Romans, Vespasian. We now started at almost 2,000 years of exile, 1,900 and something years since the year 69 CE. And we've been in exile since. God has totally removed himself, which is why we don't see any open miracles. There's no, divine prophecy. You don't see stuff like you saw in temple times, right?
Question. If God's presence was
Manifest.
manifested here in this world, and it was within the Ark of the Covenant, with the tablets, why would God allow the first temple to be destroyed? It's like allowing himself to be destroyed.
That's a very, very important question to understand. And I want you to understand the context of your question. Oh, and of course you understand the context of your question. I'd like to elaborate on the context of your question. So you're saying if God's presence was here, why would he allow the temple to be destroyed? Right?
Especially the very location where he was. Not just that he was here
Behavior
in
of
the
the-
world, but he was
behavior.
there.
Not only that, but we actually had a physical marker of the presence of God. You know that? The Ark of the Covenant had 2 cherubs on top of it.
Right.
When they were made out of solid gold. When they were facing each other, it meant that God was at peace with his people. When they were back to back, it meant that God was estranged. It says in the Talmud, when the Babylonians entered the Holy of Holies, what did they find? The Ark of the Covenant with the 2 cherubs facing each other. What does that tell you? That tells you that even at the time of when God allowed our destruction, apparently he was still cool with us.
So why do you allow that?
So why did he allow it?
Too many Jews were turning their back on him.
Well, if they were turning their back on him, he would have turned his back on us too. What do you think? This is your question, right? It's a very, very fundamental question. I just want you to realize this is the question of Yadato. This is the question of Yadato. That if God is always present, then why do bad things happen? And the answer is he's testing us. Well, it's not that he's testing us. He's turning away because he's preparing to give us a bigger light, a bigger revelation. And we got a bigger revelation. Every time that there was a darkness, there's a greater light that follows.
Cherubs are facing each other. God was with us, is happy with us.
Who made that rule about the church facing?
Oh, that's
Talmudic.
from the Talmud.
It's written.
It's written, yeah.
That was last week's Torah.
Does it say something about them back to back in the portion? Maybe it was in Rashi or something.
It says how they should be.
How they were made, yeah. But the Medrash talks about when they turned back to back. They would actually open up the Ark of the Covenant for the people to view from time to time. Nobody was allowed to go in there, but they would open the curtain so people could see. From like the way the temple was built, you could see from the ladies section all the way through. But Marty, I just want you to understand, this is a very, very deep fundamental question. If God is always present, if you're going to tell me that God is not present, I get it. That's why bad things happen. Okay. A lot of people take that approach. They're like, God checked out. He fell asleep at the wheel, and that's why something bad happened. But we can't accept that. We cannot fundamentally accept that because God can't operate in a way where he's removed from us, because if he does, then we cease to exist. So if we exist, that means he's here. So on what level is he here? That's what the Maimer is about to say. It's a state of slumber. Just like a person who's sleeping. Is he alive? Yes. Is he conscious? No. So, no. So God is animating us, but is he focused on us? No. You understand? That's where we're going. And I want to make sure that I got to finish this piece here, because I cannot leave you on a cliffhanger that says, okay, God checked out, we're done. Right? I can't leave you on that piece. I just want to make sure we finish that. Go ahead.
I understand if he was unhappy with us, if we weren't deserving, so he destroys the city. He destroys portions of the Jewish people. But his own temple, where his presence is, why would he allow that to be destroyed?
So this ties already into Tisha B'Av, where the Medrash tells us that God made a kindness with us, that he allowed his wrath to be meted out on the materials of his house, instead of on his people, on the eradication, God forbid, of his people. Right? So in other words, he took the gut punch himself, so to speak. instead of on his people. It was a kindness that he did for us. This is very, very subtle, very emotional conversation, right? Which is why bad things happen to good people, right? Our Vyodaita worldview is that the teacher never abandons a student. If he turns away, it's not because he doesn't care, it's because he's preparing a much deeper, greater thing. So what's happened now is that for the past 2,000 years, we've been living in a state of exile, the longest exile in Jewish history, right? God is just, we don't know where he is at. And now we are preparing V'yodato for the great revelation of all. I got to tell you, this war in Ukraine seems to me like it is absolutely biblical. There's some Gog and Magog situation here. It's like unreal. Well, it feels like we're back in the 1800s. It's and the nuclear threat has never happened in the history of this world. It's never happened in the history of the world that nations were rattling nuclear sabers at each other. In other words, to this degree.
Well, the Cuban Missile Crisis was before you were born.
Right, that's true. Okay, fair enough. But was it this? Was it this?
It was in Cuba.
It was in
based
Cuba,
on the
hey?
United States.
It was Russia too, hey?
And it was Russia. It was Khrushchev.
It was all relative. I mean, now we have nuclear weapons. to wipe
But then,
out
then they didn't show aggression, did they? Here, they're actively
Oh, no,
bombing.
They put missiles in Cuba.
No, but they weren't killing people.
No,
Were they?
But that was the threat because they.
Okay, I mean, this guy is crazy enough to, to actually
So
push the
Rabbi,
button. Okay, fair enough.
currently, At what level is Hashem? He didn't go all the way back up 7 levels, right? He's somewhere.
Um,
I thought
We've been working on it. We've been working on therapy and the relationship, the marriage therapy. Okay, we've been 2,000 years of therapy with our what?
I said, you haven't gotten the memo.
Yeah, we're waiting.
There he is.
Well, yeah, we're not sure. When you're marriage therapy, you're never quite sure where she's at.
Is it one of the things? I don't know if he's here to do good or bad or punish or reward. I think he just is.
He just is.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting Kabbalistic perspective there. It's very nice to say that. You're like, it just is. I'm not really understanding what he might be doing or not.
Hanging out.
Yeah, but look, I definitely think that God is engaged on some level. I'd also think, though, I do think that he's checked out more. He's removed more than ever in the history of the world because we're spiritually in the dark right now. I do think we're spiritually in the dark.
No, that's not fully what I mean.
I do think that the exile's never been this intense. Here's what I'm thinking. I think that the exile's never been this intense in the past 4,000 years. Think about it. You got, the majority of the Jewish people that are not, majority of the people that are not, they're just apathetic. Think about that. They're just apathetic, indifferent.
Absolutely.
What does that tell you?
Like we said, you read Torah, this and that. I think you're supposed to, but then to directly connect by laying tefillin, by prayer and davening, you create or manifest.
Right, and that's where we're going to go with the mimer.
And I don't know if it's God sitting there pulling all the shots on
Look, I'm going to say to you, I'm going to quote Dickens by saying it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. Okay. On the one hand, I think it's the worst of times. We've never been this far removed from the revelation of Mount Sinai. How's that? We've never been this far removed from the holiness of the temple because just time chronologically pushes us deeper into the dark, right? At the same time, we've also never been so close to the light of Mashiach.
I think we're more elevated now thanks to the Rabbi. I don't
There was, honestly, a leader like the Rabbi, I don't know if there was, a generation was given, a leader like the Rebbe was extraordinary. What?
Doesn't each generation have?
Yeah, but they're different kinds of Rebbes,
Of course. different kinds of-
Look, the fact of the matter is, I'm glad that you're thinking about this concept, that God is here, but he's not here. It's like he's hovering, So where's he at? Generally speaking, because he's infinite, he's removed. This, you remember, is, well, let's just do this piece. Now, the state of sleep is used as a metaphor to describe this mode of God's treatment of the world. When a person sleeps, his mind rises above its vessel, his body, and ascends to its source. All that remains is the power of fantasy, a mere glimmer of the mind's true power. So when you're sleeping, your mind is alive, yes, but it's just removed from reality. So too, when God is in the state of removal from us, He's creating us, yes, he's present, but he's just not focused. He's not consciously focused, right? So that's the default state of being of our world. Now,
So is the davening focusing God?
our mission is to wake him up. Yeah, absolutely. That's what they did in the Purim story. And the Purim story, remember the intensity of the darkness, the intensity of the miracle really, is Bala Eloahu, not the Dosh Nasa Melech. In the beginning of the 5th chapter, you're supposed to raise your voice. This is from the Maharal of Prague. You're supposed to raise your voice because this represents the peak of the miracle. The peak of the miracle was that the king arose from his slumber. Which king? Not Achashverosh, but the King of Kings, the master of the universe, that he woke up. Why did he wake up? Because the Jews were doing teshuvah. That's why. Esther had just done the fast for 3 days, and she just had that conversation with Mordechai, and they were ready to roll. She was fasting and preparing, and the people were doing teshuvah. The people were turning back to Hashem. Hashem was now is waking up, right? Now let's look at this. Torah's achievement. Hence these verses. And the Lord awoke like one who had been asleep. Psalms. And arise, why do you sleep, my Lord? Psalms. These are pleased that the light of the blessed Ein Sof in its essence be revealed in Chachma and Chesed, and through them in the world at large, and may his countenance shine. That is the inner aspect of his will. This awakening or revelation and shining of countenance is achieved through the divine energy elicited by the observance of the Torah and mitzvahs. So far, here's what we can realize: that it's not okay to stay in a state of divine slumber. You're in grave danger when you do. That is the Purim story. When the Jews went to the feast of Achashverosh and turned their backs on God, he did the same to us, and we were vulnerable to grave, mortal danger. You don't want to stay in that state. Now we're starting to understand that we want to find a way to wake him, right? We're going to find out in just a moment. We do that through Torah, right? But now we understand why. Okay, we're going to have to understand the mechanism of why Torah does that, but we're starting to understand now why it is that the Jews told God, listen, we'd love to study Torah by day and by night, like our life depends on it, right? So in this context, we can understand the verses, look down from heaven and see. That was the verse we just said before, right? Look down from the heavens and see. Right? Remember we said that verse? Look down from your holy abode from heaven and bless your people, Israel. And look down from your holy abode from heaven. The Hebrew word for heaven, shamayim, is a combination of a two-word phrase, sham mayim, meaning water is there. Heaven, shamayim, is sham mayim, water is there. Water is a metaphor for Torah. So shamayim represents, well, we'll discuss this more deeper. I'm just doing superficial right now. So what is a metaphor for the Torah? As it says, behold, all who are thirsty go to Torah, go to the water, which refers to Torah. By the way, Tanya chapter 5 also goes into a whole discussion about why water is Torah. And then through the Torah, we will merit the fulfillment of the continuation of the verse, and bless you, people of Israel. So it says like this: oh, look down, O God, from your holy abode from heaven. What's from heaven? From Torah. Let our Torah arouse you to look down through the lens of Torah and bless your people, Israel. For the Torah causes God to view the Jewish nation as an important entity. All the primary understanding and revelation of godliness comes through the medium of the Torah, and the Torah is revealed to us. This concept, you can do it superficially. This concept is alluded to in the verse. The heavens opened up and I saw divine visions. This is Ezekiel. The heavens, that is the Torah, are compared to a magnifying glass through which we are seen by God. The Torah is a magnifying glass, just as a lens enhances the image of the object, making it seem greater and more praiseworthy than it would appear without the lens. Similarly, the Torah makes the Jewish people who fulfill it seem greater and more praiseworthy in God's eyes. Now, chapter 2 is going to discuss this in detail, but for now we know, we finally understood the problem. The problem is that God is checked out, and we've got to figure out a way to wake him up. It's very dangerous when he's in that state. We have to wake him up. We can do that through Torah. We've got given that extraordinary gift of being able to do that through Torah. And that's the reason why we would want to study Torah. We'll discuss in subsequent discussions about why it is that Torah does this. Any questions? Good. So far, fantastic, guys. Yeshikach, thank you very much. Have everybody a wonderful, wonderful day.
Why don't
past the